Well, hello everyone and welcome to LifeSpring Church. We are super glad that you're here with us today, whether you're here in person, whether you're here with us online. Super big shout out. We're really glad, really thankful that you're here. I'm Mark. I'm one of the pastors of LifeSpring Church, and I'm particularly excited to be in this series we're calling In the Meantime. Now, in case you haven't noticed, this past week or so has been pretty daggone hot outside, okay? We've had a couple days of relief lately, but it's been pretty hot. So summer's starting to set in, which honestly bums me out a little bit because I am a big fan of the spring, all right? I absolutely love the spring. I love the weather. My favorite thing about the spring, though, is that we kick off baseball season. Now, I love baseball season. I grew up playing baseball, always played, and now I have the privilege of coaching my little boy's team. He plays 6U, so it's a lot of fun. What was kind of weird about this year, though, like many of you face the same situation. We got ready to start our baseball season, and we picked our teams. But about the time we picked our teams was about the time that coronavirus began to outbreak here in the U.S. And so there was a lot of questions of whether or not we'd be able to play or not. And so we decided to press forward. We went ahead and picked our teams. We went ahead and called parents and let them know who our kids on our team was going to be, even though we were not sure or not whether we would actually be able to play. So then began this kind of waiting season for us where we waited to see if we were going to play or not. And so we had no idea whether or not we were actually going to play. And so I think that many of you can probably identify with that and things in your life, things that you were hoping were going to maybe start or kick back off at some point. Maybe it was school for some kids. Maybe it was your work. Maybe things got changed around a lot. And so you found yourself in this season of waiting. And I think this idea of in the meantime is not only relevant, though, for this season that we're in right now, but also for all of life. Because I think that all of us would agree there are always going to be seasons in our life where we're in the meantime, where you're waiting for the next thing to happen. You're waiting for whatever it is. Maybe if you're a kid, you're waiting to go to the next grade. Maybe you're waiting for ball season to start. Maybe if you're middle or high school, or maybe you're waiting for you to get your license. Maybe you're waiting to get that new phone. Maybe you're waiting to graduate. There's always something you're waiting for. If you're an adult, we're always waiting for things like that raise at our job. We're waiting for our kids maybe to graduate. Maybe we're waiting for retirement. We're always waiting for something. So we find ourselves kind of moving through life, having these high points of life that we're waiting for. And so the reason that we want to talk about this is because our tendency as people is to just kind of drift through these seasons of in the meantime. And in a lot of ways, we waste them, do we not? We waste these seasons of in the meantime, when in all reality, these could be the best seasons of our life. If we were to take advantage of these moments between the big moments, this in the meantime, what I call the flux period, kind of in between, if we were to take advantage of these moments, I believe that we can really make our lives a lot more meaningful because we're not just living from point to point, but rather we're living every moment of every day as if it were super important, because it is. So this morning we're going to be talking about two different stories kind of sandwiched together that Jesus shares with us. And these are actually stories that really did happen. So we're going to be looking at this one story of a guy named Jairus. So Jairus, we're going to talk more about him in just a moment, but Jairus was a man who had a little girl, his daughter, who had gotten sick. And I'm sure he had tried all kinds of things for her to get better, but the reality was that we're going to read about is his daughter wasn't getting better. So there was no end in sight for him. We're also going to read about another lady who was born with a blood disease. She had a blood disease, it says, for 12 years. And for her, she had been waiting for a solution. She'd been waiting for that to get better, but it just didn't. And so for her, it's like the end of the road never came. And so she was in this season of being in the meantime, and there was never an end in sight. So the reason we want to talk about this morning, and I believe that God wants to speak to us, is because for us, we're always in a season of in the meantime. It's really a matter of what you do with this season in the meantime that you're in. All right, I compare it to a line graph. All right, so many of you do not like mathematics, and that's okay. I'm a bit of a math nerd, at least I was. I don't use it as much anymore. But I think that our lives oftentimes reflect a line graph. So if you guys would look at the graphic with me, Take a look at this graphic here. So this is a basic line graph here. And what you'll notice on a line graph is there are points on a line graph. Now, in all reality, those lines in between the points don't actually represent anything. The points are the only real data points on this graph. So, for instance, if you look, it's graph month by month, the total of sales and produce. So, if you look at October, you see that point. If you look at November, you see that point. And so the points are all that really matters on a line graph. The lines are actually just to connect the dots. They don't really represent anything. They help you maybe see trends, but they don't represent anything specifically. Now, the reason that I wanted to show you guys a line graph is not to nerd out this morning, but it's to give us a comparison. Because I believe that many of us live our lives like a line graph. We live from point to point, and we don't really think about that line in between. We don't really make the most of it. We're too busy looking ahead to the next point. What's the next point in our life that we're trying to shoot for? When in all reality, God has placed this period of time right before you that we can take advantage of and make the most of, right? And so what we want to do this series is we want to start looking at our life a little differently. Instead of thinking of the next point and always shooting for that, sure, it's good to have goals, but instead of only thinking about that, we're thinking about what is exactly going on right now before us. The line, if you will, in the line graph. So this is where we are this morning. This is to set us up a little bit. We're going to be reading this morning from Mark chapter 5. If you have a Bible, you want to read there, we're going to be posting it online also. We're going to be also put it on the screen here for those of you who are here in person. But we're looking at a story of really two different stories sandwiched together, okay? So we're going to begin reading with verse 21. So let's look here just for a moment and see what's going on. Look at verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." Now, what we have going on here is they began this journey on the way to Jairus' crib to help his little girl out. And then we see this story that's getting ready to take place on the journey, on the line, if you will, between where Jairus met Jesus and Jairus' home. Okay, so this is where we pick up reading to verse 25. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. She was broke. Yet instead of getting better, she only grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, though, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. So Jairus and this woman that we read about with the blood disease were two very different people. Right? They were not similar hardly at all, but they have some things in common, do they not? They both find themselves in a season of waiting, in a season of in the meantime. Jairus was waiting for his daughter to get better, but guess what? She wouldn't, or at least she didn't. So he kind of got to the end of the road, so to speak. She wasn't getting any better, so he didn't know what else to do. And the woman, on the other hand, she had been waiting to get better for 12 years. 12 years she had struggled with a blood disease. I'm sure she had tried everything. It says here she spent all of her money. And Jairus, he was a man of nobility. He probably had more means than the woman, most likely. He probably had tried everything possible for his daughter. He probably had visited the best doctors. He probably had tried the best medications. He probably had tried it all. So what we see with these two stories that collide that Jesus is telling us about is we see the same common theme. Both this man and this woman, they get to a place where there is no hope. There is no hope. They have nowhere to run to. If I can use this word, they're desperate. They're desperate for something to happen, for someone to step in. So they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. So what do? They heard about this man named Jesus, who was going from place to place and doing all kinds of crazy miracles. And I'm sure in their minds they had to be thinking like, hey, it's worth a shot. Like, he's healing all these other people and my life is hopeless. Like if I could just get around him, maybe if I could be in his presence, or this woman had to be thinking, if I could just touch him, right? Maybe it'll change everything. So these people found themselves in a hopeless place, and that's what brought them to this place of desperation. That's what made them reach out to Jesus. And if I could be honest with you, I think that many of us have been at that place. Like we've been at a place in our life where we've had enough. Like there's no end in sight. This season of In the Meantime is not ending. And so we get to this place where we're like, well, I don't know what to do next. And if I could be transparent with you guys, I believe that this is a good place for us to be in. Because all of us need to get to a place of desperation in our lives. Because oftentimes it's that place of desperation in which makes us actually finally look up to Jesus. And this is where they find themselves. There's nowhere else to look. But there's Jesus standing the entire time. Now, while these two characters in this story come from very different backgrounds, they also have a few similarities. Now, let me look at the woman with the blood disease just for a moment. I want you to put yourself in her shoes just for a second. This woman had a disease that made her have to be alienated or outcast, if you will, from her community, from where she lived. She couldn't enter into the temple, which was a big deal during that time. She was an outcast. And she didn't just deal with this for like a week or two. She dealt with it for 12 years. No one wanted to be around her. Like if this is helpful, think about like if you know someone who's had COVID-19, or maybe you've been through that. Like when someone gets COVID-19 right now, what happens? No one wants to be around them. It's almost like you're branded with a scarlet letter and no one wants to be around you. And so it's a kind of a hard place to be in if you've been through it, or if you know someone who's been through it, because you want support, but yet everyone's kind of scared to be around you. In a lot of ways, people looked at this woman as if, we don't know exactly what's wrong with you. So we don't want to be around you. Sure, we maybe sympathize with you, but we don't want to be around you. So imagine what she had to be going through. She lived in isolation for 12 years. 12 years. It's a bad place to be. And this is where she found herself. So she was desperate. She was desperate. She was hopeless. So let's look at a couple of things right quick. So first of all, the common denominator with both of these stories is that they found themselves in a hopeless place and they were desperate. Now, why am I pointing this out? Because I believe if we're ever going to move forward out of these seasons of just drifting through these seasons of what we call In the Meantime, then we have to realize that we can't dig ourselves out of these places of hopelessness. We can't dig ourselves out of these places of being desperate. Like these two characters in the story, we have to get to the place where we're willing to reach out to others to need help or for our help. So, you may be wondering, what does that have to do with me? I'm not going through a season of desperation. Like, what does this have to do with me? All right, so granted, I don't know where everyone's coming from. I don't know your background story. If you're watching online, maybe you're watching just because you heard about it on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, and you're just tuning in with us because, hey, you thought you'd give it a shot. That's cool. Maybe you don't have much of a religious background, and you heard of people talk about Jesus, and so you're wanting to check things out. I don't know. Maybe you've been in church your entire life, and maybe you're at this place where you're living from point to point on this line graph you call life. I don't know. Every one of us is at a different place in our life. But here's what I can guarantee and what I can promise is that all of us have this thread in our life, this common denominator, if you will, of living our life from point to point. And we kind of drift through these seasons where honestly, we're just wasting our life away. Because we're not living with purpose, we're not living with meaning, we're just living from point to point. And so what we try to do, and this is what most of us kind of default to, is instead of just drifting through life and being consumed with the boredom, so to speak, what we do is we look for some way to escape reality. It's what we all do. We try to escape reality instead of facing it. So that looks different for every one of us. Maybe you escape by going to video games. Maybe you escape by consuming yourself in your work, in your job. Maybe you look for relationships to escape reality. It's different for all of us, but we tend to run towards trying to escape our reality. But here's the thing that all of us need to grasp this morning, whether you're here in person or whether you're watching online. And you guys can write this down. Evading reality does not equal escaping reality. Evading reality does not equal escaping reality. You get that, right? You can't get away from reality. This life that you have in front of you, no matter what you're facing, it is your reality. Okay? So you can either face it or you can try to escape it, but you're never really going to escape it. You're only going to evade it. Now that's crucial, because if we're ever going to move forward, we have to realize the reality that God has placed in our lives. We have to realize this is my life, this is what's going on, and so I can either face it or I can evade it, but you can't escape it, right? So, let me tell you a few things about Jesus this morning that I believe is going to be really helpful for us when it comes to this idea of trying to evade our reality. First of all, let me tell you a few things here. First of all, Jesus is the one your heart most longs for. He is the one our heart most longs for. But get this, secondly, He is also the one your heart most runs from. So you have this weird dichotomy going on inside of you where He is the one your heart most longs for, but He's also the one our heart most runs from. So this is a weird tension to be in for most of us, because we feel like we need Him if we hear about Him, but then we also feel led towards not following Him. There's kind of this tug-of-war game going on inside of our heart. But get this, here's where He steps in. While we have this tug-of-war going on inside of us, He is running after us the entire time. His love is chasing us down. He is relentlessly pursuing us. This is the good news of Christianity. That's why this church exists, is because He is continuously pursuing us, pursuing this community, and pursuing the world, even though we're running from Him. Right? So we see this because He's done everything necessary to make it possible for us to have a relationship with God. Everything necessary to make it possible for you to be folded back into the family of God. You see, all of us in our natural state were born separated from God because of our sin. We've rebelled against Him from the time we were born to now. It's just who we are and how we live, okay? But the cool thing and the great news about Jesus is He has come as a human to take the place for the punishment that you and I deserve. So while we were running from Him, He was running after us. He had us in His mind as He pursued us and as He even went to the point of dying in our place. You see, when He died on the cross, He stepped between you and I, and He took the punishment that we deserve, so that it's possible, if we get to the place of desperation, we can turn to Him and run to Him, and He, in fact, will rescue us. Now, notice I use the word desperation here, because listen, Jesus isn't just an add-on to our lives. Jesus came to be the Lord of our life. Either He's the Lord of our life or He's nothing at all. And so we have to get to the place where we realize I can't save myself. And when we get to that place, we realize that we are in such great need of Him. So listen, the reason I want to talk about Jesus and bring Him into the equation is because just like this line graph that we kind of live point to point, most of us anyways, until Jesus comes into the picture, this will continue to be your reality. You will continue to live point by point, just drifting from one big thing to the next. Maybe it's your trip to Disney World you're looking forward to, or maybe you're looking forward to getting married or having kids or retiring or getting a raise at work or whatever it is, and you just kind of drift from point to point, but we never really have purpose for the entirety of our life. Let's get back to the story just for a moment. We're going to look at verse 29 here. Let's look what happens next to this woman who touched Jesus in the crowd. Verse 29 says, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was being freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone from Him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched me?" Don't you know that Jesus is always waiting for us to come to Him? Like He supposedly had no idea that this woman was coming to touch Him, but yet He knew, right? Billions of people in the world. It doesn't matter, though. You matter to Jesus. When you approach Him, He knows, and He is there waiting for you. Look at verse 31. You see the people crowding against you. This is the disciples talking. Obviously, they weren't social distancing during that time. Shame on them. "Who touched me?" He asked. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at His feet, and trembling with fear, told Him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." What a beautiful story, right? So here's what I know, though. There are some of you watching today that you're facing uncertain times. You're facing things in your life that you would have never wished that you would have gone through. You would never even wish that anyone else would have to go through it. But yet you're facing them. What I want to tell you is that here at LifeSpring, we have a family. And we have a family who wants to stand with you in your hard times. Whether it's sickness, whether it's mental illness, whether it's this really hard financial times you're going through, whatever it is, I get the fact that it feels like no one is around when you're in a place of desperation, doesn't it? And so we want to come alongside of you. We want to journey with you. If you're there, let us know. There's a couple ways you can let us know. First of all, if you're watching online, we're going to post a link in the chat box where you can request prayer. And we would love to come alongside of you and pray. If you're here in person, you can get on your phone. The very first page of our website, if you scroll down a little bit, you can request prayer. We would love to come alongside of you and pray with you because I realize that going through these seasons is hard. It's really hard. And so we want to come alongside of you and help you journey through it. But listen, this woman came desperate before Jesus. She came desperate. She's like, if I could just touch his garment, maybe it'll change my situation. See, for her, there was no end in sight. For many of us, it can feel like there's no end in sight, right? It can feel like that. We just drift. But what Jesus was telling her when the woman finally did approach him, you notice by the way he talks to her, he tells her, welcome home. Welcome home. Like, I see that you're desperate. I see that you're in need. But here with me, you have found what your heart longs for. Welcome home. And if I can echo the same thing, if you've ever stepped foot at our building here at LifeSpring Church, we have that slogan printed across the front of our front entrance, and it says, welcome home. Why is that? Because for us as a church, guys, just like Jesus, we don't care what background you come from. We don't care what you did last night. Don't care what you did this morning, to be honest. Because God wants you to know that he is standing with open arms, and he's saying, welcome home. He's always there. He's always waiting for us. So, I want to cover something this morning that I believe is very significant for us to realize about this passage before we move on and dismiss it. So first of all, we're not going to finish the entire story. Sorry. So let me give you a quick summary for the sake of time. So Jesus continued on his journey to Jairus' house, and one of Jairus' servants came up and told him, hey, you're too late, basically. His daughter's already died. Basically said, hey, you can turn around, the show's over. It's done. She's dead. Like, you're too late. But you know what Jesus did? He laughed. He laughed because he knew that nothing was impossible for God. And just because this little girl died don't mean that Jesus couldn't do what he set out to do. So then Jesus goes to her house, and it says that he touched her, and when he touched her, she came back to life. Crazy, awesome miracle. Go home and read it. It's really good. But for the sake of time, we're not going to cover that this morning. But notice the phrase that he touched her. This is the same phrase really that's used when the woman with the blood disease, what did he do? What did she do? She touched him, right? Now, why is this significant? So let me give you a little background story here. Don't lose me in the details because I have to go through a few details for this to have some significance. But during the time period that Jesus lived in, okay, all the hundreds and thousands of years right before that, God had chosen to work specially through this group of people called the Israelites. Now, these people were chosen by God and were blessed by God, and he gave them certain commandments and rules and different standards to live by so that, one, they can enjoy the blessing of being God's children, but secondly, so that they can properly worship him the way that he sees fit, the way that's required. Okay? So he gave them different laws and rules to live by that would help them, usher them, if you will, to the feet of God, to be able to worship God rightly. Okay? So, with that being said, so there were these certain rules that they had to live by. But there were also rules that would declare whether or not they were clean or unclean. And whether you were clean or unclean determined whether you can go in God's presence or not, whether you can worship God rightly. So there were all these different things that God said was unclean. And if you were unclean, you had to take the necessary steps to become clean before you can enter into the presence of God. Okay? So, with that being said, what was required to come into the presence of God was a sacrifice. An animal had to be sacrificed on your behalf to make you clean, okay? Now, there were lots of different ways that you can become unclean. But two of those ways were, one, touching a dead person, and two, being or touching a person with a blood flow disease, right? So both of these different scenarios were to declare you unclean. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because I don't believe these two stories are random, okay? God is showing us something here. What was supposed to happen in that time period was if you touched the woman with this blood disease, guess what? You were declared unclean. And you had to go through all the different steps to become clean again. Or if you were to touch this dead girl, okay, it was necessary from time to time, but if you were to touch her, you would have become unclean. But what do we see happen in this story? It's a beautiful picture of what Jesus came to do. You see, when the woman touches Jesus, he doesn't become unclean, she becomes clean. You see it? In the same way with Jairus' daughter, when Jesus goes and touches this little girl who is dead, he should be the one who becomes unclean, but instead, she becomes clean. You see, Jesus wants us to see he is the great purifier. He is the great Son of God who has come to be the perfect sacrifice for all of us. All of us are unclean before God, but he has come to make us clean. This is the good news of Jesus. We can't receive the forgiveness of God without coming to the one who can actually cleanse us. That is Jesus. He is the great purifier. He is the Son of God. He is the one that we all need. So get this, and you guys can write this down. The greatest thing we get when we run to Jesus is not something, it is someone. The greatest thing we get when we run to Jesus is not something, it is someone. You see, many of us, we struggle with this question, especially as we read a passage like this. If I can just kind of step into your world for a second. We think, well, Jesus is out healing everyone in this time period. Like, how come Jesus doesn't heal me? Like, I've been struggling with maybe this physical condition for years, or maybe you have someone in your family, maybe a grandmother with cancer, maybe a neighbor with diabetes. We all know someone who's struggling with some sort of physical ailment or maybe a mental disease. There's all kinds of stuff going on, right? So we find ourselves asking the question, well, how come Jesus doesn't heal me? Like does he care more about them than he did me? So let me share this with you. What if Jesus' primary goal while he was on earth wasn't necessarily just to bring physical healing? And what if his goal now isn't just to bring physical healing to people's life? What if he's allowing you or that person or your family member to journey through this for a greater goal? What if there's a bigger picture, a bigger plan in place? You see, Jesus didn't go around healing everybody, even in his time period, right? There's stories of him healing people, but this wasn't always the case. You see, Jesus didn't come to be some miracle-working medical phenom just healing everybody who walked across his path. He came for a much bigger and greater plan than that. And I know it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that, especially if you're facing sickness today or you know someone who is. But listen, how much greater is the reward to be restored back to God for all of eternity, right? This is what Jesus came for. He came to restore humanity back to a place where they can have a relationship with the God who made them again, so that we can step into a life of purpose and not drift through this life aimlessly, so that we can worship God because he deserves it. God did this for us. And get this, now he wants to use you as a part of that too. So now you get to help affect other people's eternities. Like, how crazy is that? So when we start to worry, like, how come God isn't healing me right now? What I want you to see is that maybe God has something much bigger in plan for you. Maybe he does. Maybe he needs to bring you to the place of desperation before you see that. When there's no end in sight, Jesus wants you to know you can run to him. You can run to him. So, Jesus says something a few chapters later that I believe summarizes this perfect. In Mark 8, verse 36, he says this: "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" You see, Jesus has a much bigger picture in mind than oftentimes we do, right? So what we need to realize is that what he wants most from us is for us to run to him. Even if you don't find yourself in a place of desperation today like these folks, Jesus may bring you there, first of all, so just kind of warning. But get this, he also doesn't want us just drifting through these seasons of, in the meantime, just living from point to point in our life, trying to escape reality. The only thing we're doing is actually evading reality when our reality is right before us, and he wants us, instead of trying to evade it, he wants us to step into his plan for you. Right? And this can look different for all of us. If you have yet to give your life to him, he's calling you to run to him. In faith, he tells you that he will completely rescue you and save you from the hopeless place that you're in. And yes, you are hopeless apart from him. But if you're a follower of him already, guess what? The same advice still applies. He's calling us to run to him for purpose in these in the meantime seasons. Because guess what? If he's given you life, every moment of every day is for him, and he has a purpose behind it. And so he wants us to step into that purpose. He wants us to live in that purpose. And he wants you to be filled with joy as you walk with him, as you pursue him, as you live for him, as you share him, as you worship him. It's all about him at the end of the day. So when we realize that it's all about him, our life ceases to be this line graph where we jump from point to point, but instead, every moment of it is live for him. It's live for him. So what does that look like for you? I don't know. But I can tell you this, he wants to know you more, and he invites you into his plan. So he wants us to seek after him daily in his word. He wants us to seek after him daily by talking to him in prayer. He wants us to journey with him, because as we're walking along, if we walk with him, guess what? The Bible actually promises that he will guide our steps and he will direct our path, and he will lead you to exactly where he wants you, and he will lead you to do exactly what he wants you to do. So instead of drifting purposely or purposelessly, if I could say that, if that's even a word, he wants us to live our life with purpose. And so today, I want to invite you, no matter what side of the fence you're on, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, receive him, follow him, run to him, because listen, he has much bigger plans for your life than you ever could. And I guarantee the adventure that he wants to lead you on is far greater than the one you're on right now. Because just drifting from one point to the next, I've been there, it stinks. It's not fun. But what he invites us to is so much bigger and so much greater. So I want to invite you to. Let's pray together. Jesus, I pray, Lord, in your powerful name, that everyone watching today online or here in person, God, would encounter you in a real way. God, may they see their situation as hopeless, and may they run to you. Because what we know about you, God, is that you are waiting. You're waiting for us. Thank you for waiting on me. Years ago, I ran to you and you received me, Lord, and I won't ever forget that, because, God, you didn't have to. God, you didn't have to bless me with the forgiveness that's offered in your Son. It was completely given to me free. I couldn't work for it. I couldn't earn it, yet you gave it to me freely, and I am so grateful. So I pray this over anyone watching today or anyone here in person. Lord, I pray if they've never received the peace and the forgiveness and the love that you offer us, God, I pray they would receive it and they would follow wholeheartedly after you, submitting their whole life to you. And guys, if that is you, you can just call out to him now, and he promises that he will receive you if you call out on his name in faith. And if you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus watching this morning, God, I want to pray with you for a moment. God, we cry out to you on the behalf of your children. God, your sons and daughters, as you affectionately referred to this woman that you healed as your daughter. God, you have adopted us into your family, and God, you want to make the most of every moment of our life. So God, I pray that we would live wholeheartedly for you, all in, all the time. And God, I pray that you would work miraculously through us to help change people's eternities, to help change our community, to help bring restoration. God, Lord, we need it right now. Our community is broken. We are in need, and we need you. You're the only one who can step in to fix these injustices we see. You're the only one who can fix the world's problems that are all around us that we see daily. God, you are the great healer. You are the great purifier, and we call upon your name today. God, would you show up in a big way in every person's life today who watches or who's here with us, God. We love you so much.